So the media in the US has been kicking up a fuss about this recently, about the fact that some illegal migrant children that come to the US and get stopped by border guards and with their parents or without them are being separated from their families. They're being torn apart, and it's terrible because they run afoul of various dangers, including child trafficking and drug trafficking and sex labor and all these other things. Now, people in the media are trying to, first of all, they're using this story to remove the attention from the Inspector General report that came out on the FBI. But that's on another topic. Just bear in mind that when this news comes out and when all the attention is being given to this, there is something bigger that is being covered up. In this instance, an investigation on the FBI clearly showed that there was a big amount of bias on the side of the FBI towards Hillary Clinton, and there's some indication, some inclination to believe that both Obama and Hillary Clinton had full knowledge of what they're doing and how wrong it was, and that it put the country in significant danger. Oh, also that Trump was completely fine with firing Comey. He was actually acting in a very unprofessional and insubordinate way. But that's on another topic. What the mainstream media is not telling you is that these laws that are separating children on the border were passed in previous administrations. They were passed under Democrat rule, and most Democrats actually voted for it. If you go into the article and you do a bit of digging into the images that they show these children inside of cages and, oh, it's horrible, it's really bad. Those images were actually taken during the Obama admin. They're trying to pin this on Trump, but this has nothing to do with Trump. This is something that has been happening from the Obama admin, and the laws that put this into motion were actually passed during that time. Now, what Trump is effectively doing is that he says, well, these laws are on the book, it's time to enforce them. For anyone out there that says that, poor children and illegal migrants are okay and they should come, well, you need to realize that going about it in an unlawful way is bad. If you have laws on the books that say people cannot cross into the United States without permission, so to speak, from the United States, it is a bad idea to just waive those laws and say, well, let's just ignore those laws and be lawless. You don't want to do that in a proper, educated, and polite society. You just don't want to say, well, even though these laws are on the books, you are going to just, it doesn't matter. This is, we should just enforce them, because that sets a precedent. It sets a precedent to not enforce any of these laws. Now, what is actually happening? Now, what you can see from all the articles being posted is that people who arrive at the border and are caught by border patrols with children are eventually separated from the children. This happens because you can't just throw the children in prison along with the perpetrator of crossing the border illegally. The children are not really punished harshly for crossing the border illegally, usually because they are being dragged through it by a responsible adult. Now, that doesn't mean that they can just go to prison with the adult. So what ends up happening is that the children get a mild punishment if they are older, and then they go into state housing or caretakers. The problem with child trafficking arrives that there is no checking done on these caretakers, who they are, what they're doing, and you can see that a lot of people who would be running child trafficking rings would take advantage of this situation. Here are some children who are definitely in a vulnerable position. People are just going to chuck them back to Mexico, and now we can take advantage of them. This is not to say that they should stay. This is to say that it's a terrible system where you put children in the hands of people who have not properly been vetoed. Even if it is for 1-2 months, it would be better for them to stay in a foster home than to go into some unverified caretaker's home. Now, eventually, when the adult is released, the children get back together and get both turned into Mexico. Now, this is not me proposing that we should just let the children stay or let people go through. People need to realize that how has this situation transpired? Now, you see, if you go back and look at stats from the past during Bill Clinton's administration, for example, and subsequent administrations, that the most of the migration that happened from Mexico to the US was mostly males from a young age, between 18 and 25. Now, this has shifted quite a lot, where it still happens a lot with that demographic specifically, but a lot more children and people accompanied with children are being run across the border. Now, why is this happening? People need to realize that the people who are crossing into the United States, whether they're doing it on themselves or most likely being aided by some cartels, they need to realize that they know how the US Border Patrol system works. They know how to get across. And when Democrats put into place some laws that were supposed to protect children, make sure that people who come illegally here, have some decency and some rights and stay in some mild comfort and their human rights are not violated, it ended up becoming that what happened was that during the Obama admin, in the early years of the Obama admin, pretty much anyone who crossed over the border with a child was just given a free pass. Well, you can just come right along, and you have a child, just come. You're free to go, and you just get deported instead of serving a sentence. People need to realize that in the US, when you get caught crossing the border, well, you get a misdemeanor and you maybe get 1-2 months in jail. But if you're caught multiple times doing that, you get more. Now, with the children, it was a safe way of just going back or going through the American border. What ended up happening, and this has been documented many times, is that people crossing the border have actually, when they don't have children, they just grab a random child. Someone on the cartel has a child that they want to cross over to the US. Some family member that is already on the US has contacts in the cartel and wants one of their cousins, one of their siblings to come to the US. Well, they go in the company of someone who is not related to them, but they know that when they get to the border with a child, if they say that the child is there, it's going to make the authorities more lenient. Now, this during the Obama administration really boosted a spike in the amount of people trying to cross the border with children. You need to realize when people want to come to the US and you impose a rule that, well, only people who come with children can cross into the US, suddenly people will find children everywhere. They're just going to get children everywhere to just come to the US because that is their goal. Now, what Trump has done is that he has given the order to say, well, these laws are on the books and we are going to enforce them. We're not going to let people pass. And while we don't have the border wall, the laws that we have, we will enforce so that people get the idea that, well, it's not easy to go through the US through the border, so you shouldn't come. It's easier to go through the legal channels than to come through the border. Well, fine. If you want to have a polite legal society, you need to enforce the laws that are on the books. People blaming Trump for this are completely out of their minds. Trump has said multiple times that he wants to negotiate on the immigration policy. And I'm fully willing to bet that when Trump puts this bravado of no migrants and he wants to be super strict on migration, this is him saying to whoever's going to do negotiation with him that this is what I believe in, no migration. Now, maybe I will go for some migration. Because if he was already saying that he is for some migration, when he goes to the negotiating table, the opposite side would say, well, you want some, I want more. People need to realize this. When it comes to negotiating, people tend to find a middle ground. Now, if Trump's middle ground, what he would be willing to do is, let's say, 50%, well, he's not going to come out and say, well, I want 50%. No, he's going to say, I want 0%. And the other guy is going to say he wants 100%. And then he will say, well, we can compromise on 50%. The Democrats that are constantly railing on Trump for all these situations on the US border, and that are constantly railing on him that it's inhumane, he's breaking human rights, and how can he be so mean? First, they need to realize that US immigration policy is already very, very pro-migration. Most countries in the Western world are not like this. On the other hand, they need to realize that Trump is the one that has come out and said multiple times, hey, I am willing to negotiate with you. Let us strike a deal on this matter. I want to see how we can fix this issue so that we have a just and legal solution. But keeping laws and simply saying we're not going to enforce them is not going anywhere. So a word of advice to people, even if you're pro-migration, you need to understand that you need to go to the negotiating table. You can't just ignore laws. You can't just, that is not how society, a civilized society works. As much as I might disagree, for example, with restrictions on marijuana and cannabis, if I'm in a state that doesn't permit it, or if I'm in a state where that's illegal, I'm not going to do it. You know, and it's wrong for the state if they have those laws to just, oh, well, let's not enforce them. No, repeal the laws, take them away. If you think that immigration laws are wrong, you should lobby to have them changed. And the only way you're going to do that with Trump administration is to going into the negotiating table with them and saying, well, this is what we want, let's try to strike out a deal. And people think Trump is this lunatic. He wants to just have the most extreme ideas on immigration, which is not true. I bet that Trump would be fully willing to compromise on a situation of granting amnesty to a lot of the illegal migrants already in the U.S. inside U.S. borders, and saying, well, let's grant amnesty to a large group of immigrants, but on the other hand, I want to severely crack down on illegal migration. But while we crack down on illegal migration, let's make legal migration easier. I'm fully willing to bet that Trump would make legal migration easier because he's not dumb. And most people know this. If it is easier to legally migrate to the US, the amount of illegal migration goes down. Now, the US is already very lenient towards migration. So people need to understand that Trump is not a deranged person. He's actually willing to go to the negotiating table. The Democrats are the ones who just want the kooky ideas of having open borders and let's not enforce the law. People really need to wake up to this. And when you see articles just pulling out the children card, know that they are trying to tug on your heartstrings. They want to make you think with your heart and not with your mind. And that is a very dangerous game that people need to wise up to.